Mr. Lewis, you are a complete nut.
When Jerry Lewis died, his kids told everyone the scary truth about their dad. Some people say that comedy as we know it wouldn't exist without Jerry Lewis. He walked so that the comics we know and love could run. But the comedian's life wasn't nearly as simple or clean as one might think. The king of comedy had his dirty laundry to clean up. Hyde, his father, Danny Levitch, came to New York from the Russian Empire, and his mother, Rachel, came from Warsaw. He was born on March 16, 1926, and his father was a theater performer and his mother was a pianist. Lewis had an impulsive sense of humor early on. As a teenager, he played pranks and got into mostly harmless trouble. One of Lewis's early acts was a joke called his record act. It was just him miming singing the words to a record while it played off stage. By age 15, he had a gig in Buffalo, but it didn't sell and he couldn't book it any longer. After this failure, Jerry Lewis seemed to have given up on performing. To make ends meet, he worked as a soda vendor and an usher at New York theaters. Things started to look up when he met Max Coleman, a friend of his father's from his days in vaudeville, who convinced Lewis to give performing another chance. Lewis began performing particularly in the Borched Belt, a series of resorts in the Catskills in New York that were particularly popular with Jewish vacationers. It was here that Irving K. saw Lewis's act and became his manager. For many young men in the 1940s, their lives were put on hold as the world dissolved into conflict, but not Jerry Lewis. Due to a heart murmur, the USA rejected him from service. This allowed him to meet and fall in love with Patty Palmer, a singer. As a pair of performers, it was a natural match. They married on October 3, 1944 and would go on to adopt a son in 1949, then have 5 biological children throughout the 50s. From the outside it may have looked like the perfect marriage. However, as Lewis's star began to rise, the tensions in his home life increased with it. 1 year after getting married, he was 19 years old and performing at the Glass Hat Club in New York City. Dean Martin, then 27 and yet to fully come into his own as a singer, was also performing. It would be another 2 years before the pair would appear together for the first time on stage. This time Lewis was performing in the 500 Club in Atlantic City. The other singer that had been scheduled to perform had become unavailable. They had a problem, but Lewis had a solution. He suggested that Martin fell in. Anyone who's a fan of classic comedy will know that eventually Lewis and Martin became a dynamic duo. However, in the early days that was far from the case. They were so bad at first that the owner of the 500 Club, Skinny D'Amato, promised to kick them out if they didn't change. Martin and Lewis had to find something new or they were doomed before they even began. Classic movie fans will also know that Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were truly magical. It was their ability to improvise that made them so charming, and that's exactly what made them so successful. At the 500 Club, they threw out their pre-written jokes and instead ran with an improvised set that revolved around Lewis interrupting Martin's performance. The audience loved them. Once Lewis and Martin found the magic formula for their routine, they were unstoppable. They started touring the Eastern Seaboard and ended at the popular Copacabana Club in New York in 1948. NBC booked them for the Martin and Lewis Show, which ran on radio until 1953. At the same time, Ed Sullivan was launching one of his early shows. Toast of the Town. Martin and Lewis played a major role in the first episode of this variety show. They would continue to appear on other variety shows until April 1949, when they tried their hand at hosting their own show. With a successful radio show under their belts, they thought their TV show would get a lot of attention. But, just like in their early days on stage, the first reviews weren't great, and their pranks that worked so well on stage and radio didn't work on TV. Still, even though they tried their hand at TV, it was Hollywood that really made them famous. In 1949, Paramount signed Lewis and Martin to a film deal. They first worked together in the movie My Friend Irma, which stars Marie Wilson and Diana Lynn as two unfortunate roommates looking for love. Before this movie, Paramount hired Martin and Lewis to add some comedy to an ensemble group. This movie showed the world how great they were as a comedy duo. Between 1950 and 1956, they made 14 movies together. In 1950, another young player wanted to make a name for himself in the theater, just like his parents had done. Jimmy Petrillo was 8 years younger than Jerry Lewis, and he looked a lot like John Lewis. Lewis didn't like how Petrillo made them compete with each other, and he wanted to do something about it. Lewis hired Petrillo to play a baby in a sketch for the Colgate Comedy Hour. Petrillo remembered Lewis as being rude in the meeting. Even though Petrillo was hesitant at first, Lewis was able to convince him to sign with MCA Lewis's talent agency, but it went horribly wrong. Lewis told Petrillo he would get work, but it never came through. Instead of helping Petrillo, he put him on hold so that Petrillo would never find work and never put Lewis's career at risk. Since Petrillo was a minor at the time, his father got him out of his contract with Lewis. Later, in the early 1950s, Petrillo met singer Duke Mitchell and the two of them formed a duo that sounded like Martin and Lewis. Lewis wasn't amused and used his considerable power to blackball them whenever he could. By the spring of 1956, things were getting heated between Lewis and Martin. As the two became more famous, the attention turned more on Lewis, leaving Martin in the background. Everyone said that Lewis was the skilled one and that Martin was just tagging. 1954 came along. Martin's already tense nerves were rubbed raw when Lewis's picture was published on the cover of Look magazine. It wasn't just any picture. Luke had taken a picture of the two men together but cropped Martin out completely. This was the start of the end for special perks like watching new videos before anyone else. If you want faster responses to your comments and a say in what will be on the channel in the future, you might want to become a Fact 8 member. Click the link in the description for more information. The last movie Martin and Lewis worked on together was called Hollywood or Bust, and it wasn't fun to make. After that, they did a few shows at the Copacabana Club that they had already agreed to, and those were their last performances together. Lewis then went on his own Jerry. Lewis worked with Dean Martin for 10 years and built their careers together. For many rising stars, it would have been their time to shine, but not Lewis. After they broke up, Martin lost faith in him. Soon after, Lewis and his wife were on vacation in Las Vegas when he heard that Judy Garland's manager and husband said Garland had strep throat and couldn't perform. He wanted Lewis to save the day and take her place. At first, Lewis may not have been sure he wanted to go on stage by himself, but this was just the push he needed. The crowd went wild, and that gave him the confidence to keep going without a partner after this show in Las Vegas. Lewis recorded the songs he'd sung, which got him a record deal. He also started performing at the Sands Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, which started a new part of his career focusing on solo live performances that would be a mainstay for the rest of his career. Lewis was a real performer, and he'd shown that he didn't need Martin to entertain audiences. He appeared on specials and hosted the Academy Awards 3 times between 1956 and 1959. He stayed at Paramount and started starring in movies by himself. In 1959, he signed a contract that gave him unmatched control over his future movies and made him the highest-paid performer in Hollywood up to that point. In 1960, Paramount made a choice that changed the way movies were made forever. Lewis had shot Cinderfella for a summer release, but Paramount chose to hold it until Christmas, leaving a gap in their schedule. Paramount wanted Lewis to make a movie to replace it, so he did. He directed, co-wrote, and produced The Bellboy, which he also starred in. The shooting schedule was tight, as Lewis was filming during the day and performing at night instead of a dialogue. A big movie. The film is mostly about Lewis's physical comedy. This was done to save time on filming, but what really saved him time was being able to look at his scenes on monitors right away, which told him if he needed to re-film without having to wait for dailies since Lewis had made a silent movie. Paramount wasn't happy with the movie and pulled their support. In the end, Lewis had to use his own money to finish it. But he came out on top. The Bellboy is one of his most famous movies and made a lot of money. Jerry Lewis would continue to have a lot of creative power over his movies after this point. He would often write, direct, produce, or do all of these things. 3. Even though Lewis became famous as a solo singer, his early days with Dean Martin were still remembered, and their breakup was very sad. Lewis said that he and Martin hadn't talked in private for 20 years, which he felt bad about. However, they did get back together a few times in public. Frank Sinatra set up Martin to surprise Lewis on one of his yearly Labor Day telethons for the Muscular Dystrophy Association in 1976. That was the most famous case. In this relationship, Lewis seemed to fix things before it was too late. His family relationship, on the other hand, was a whole different story, even though he had never tried to hide his cheating. In 1980, Jerry Lewis's wife Patty finally had enough of his pranks and filed for divorce. They had been married for almost 40 years. At the time that Palmer filed for divorce, Sandra Pitnick was a stewardess who had also studied as a professional ballet dancer. Pitnick got a small dancing part in Lewis's movie Hardly Working. He married Pitnick in February 1983 and they adopted a daughter in the early 1990s. Lewis never looked back at his first family, even when it was clear that his time was up. He had his first heart attack in 1960, when he was only 34 years old. He had two more in 1982 and 2006, so when he finally died in 2017, it was more of a surprise that he lived to be 91. Lewis's death brought both praise and scrutiny of everything he'd done, especially from his family. Patty Palmer was Lewis's wife for almost 40 years and they raised 6 sons together, but his cruel death was their gift. Lewis left no money to any of his sons or their families in his will. Instead, he left money to Nick and their daughter. After Lewis's death, several of his sons talked about what it was like to live with their father. Anthony, his youngest son, said that their father was unpredictable and that they would never know which version of him would come home. Anthony even called his father emotionally abusive, but he still had some love for him. Gary, Anthony's older brother, had much harsher words for his father. Gary called him a mean and evil person and said that he never showed any of his children any love. Vanity Fair reported that several of Lewis's female co-stars from 1960s movies came together to charge him of sexual assault, harassment, and verbal abuse. These claims have not led to anything. Where is the touch? Even though Jerry Lewis's character is controversial, it can't be denied that he did a lot to help comedy grow and change. Before him, comedy was much more serious. Lewis wasn't afraid to be brave, take risks, and most importantly, laugh at himself. Many of the comedians we know and love today, like Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, and Jim Carrey, got their start thanks to Lewis. When Carrey heard that Lewis had died, he said that Lewis's comedy would push the limits of reality so far that it was an act of anarchy. This Fact 8 movie was fun, so give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more amazing stories. If you want to have a say in who we talk about, thank you for taking the time to watch the video. If you find this content interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the latest updates. See you in the next video next.